Top 5 worst pandemics in history. Recently, the word pandemic has become a bit of a buzzword. It immediately conjures up the ongoing coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic that the world is facing today. For more than a year, mankind has been battling with this global pandemic and its effects on health and the economy. With the various strains and new waves, there's a growing fear that we're not out of the woods yet, even with masking measures, social distancing, and vaccination efforts. Medical and economic research also suggests that the after effects of the pandemic could last for years. It'll likely be a long time before life returns to normal again. That is, if life can return to normal at all. However, a lot of people have been asking the same question. What is the worst pandemic in human history? Well, no one can give an absolute answer to that yet because we haven't seen the end of COVID-19, nor do we know what the future has in store. However, history is littered with different kinds of pandemics, some more significant than others. This video takes us back in time to the 5 worst pandemics in recorded history, including some details about the spread, the effects, and the number of deaths that occurred. Note that the ranking is based on the severity of the pandemic and the range of spread. Now, if you like these videos and want to see more, then make sure you leave us a like on the video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on post notifications to be the first to watch all our new and exciting videos. I will be replying to every comment on this video as well, so good luck. Now, let's start with number 5. Number 5, the smallpox pandemic. Smallpox has been a threat to mankind for thousands of years. Some research even suggests that the disease has been around long before we began documenting history. However, smallpox was only one causing deaths and illness on a smaller scale, with minor outbreaks happening at various times and places throughout the world. Things changed, however, during the Franco-Prussian War from 1870 to 1871. This was the last time that smallpox became a major pandemic throughout Europe and the surrounding regions. This time, though, the pandemic spread widely and lasted more than 5 years, from between 1870 and 1875. It wreaked havoc in countries like Belgium and Australia. It's interesting to note that a vaccine for the smallpox disease has been developed long before the pandemic, but vaccination was not compulsory. This explains why the disease was able to spread from the unvaccinated French population that were imprisoned in Germany to the citizens of the country. The peak of the infection was felt in the affected countries at different times over those years, infecting millions while leaving thousands of deaths in its wake. Number 4, the Hong Kong flu. If there's one thing that the worst pandemics in history have in common, other than their devastating effects, it's the fact that they tend to be known by multiple names. The Hong Kong flu, for example, was also called the 1968 flu pandemic. This pandemic ravaged China and many other Asian countries at a rate previously unheard of. In no time at all, it spread across the world to major parts of Europe. It lasted for more than a year, coming to an end during the first quarter of 1970. Here are some interesting facts to note about the flu pandemic. This was neither the first nor the second flu pandemic of the century. The 1968 flu pandemic was the third of its kind in the 20th century alone. It was preceded by the Spanish flu of 1918 and the 1957 Asian flu. In fact, the 1968 pandemic was actually a mutation of the 1957 flu virus, which explains some important points about its effects on the world. To understand those effects, let's look at the science. The 1957 flu pandemic was caused by an H2N2 influenza virus. The H stands for hemagglutinin antigen, while the N is neuraminidase antigen. The number following each letter represents the mutated version of the virus. While the 1957 flu was an H2N2 virus, the 1968 pandemic was caused by an H3N2 influenza virus. See the difference? Although the virus had mutated, it still retained the N2 of the original virus. This meant that anyone who was exposed to the original 1957 flu pandemic was immune to the 1968 one. Countries like Japan were not as heavily affected by the 1968 flu because a larger proportion of their population was already immune. However, the virus was able to spread like wildfire in parts of Europe that had not been exposed to the original virus. As a result, the estimated number of deaths globally was between 1 and 4 million, making it one of the worst in human history. Number 3, 2009 swine flu pandemic. One of the most recent pandemics that have plagued mankind also takes one of the top 3 spots on our list. The 2009 swine flu lasted for more than 18 months between January 2009 to August 2010. One noteworthy point about this plague is the wide range of its spread. More than 700 million individuals were affected, with some estimations reporting the number to be as high as 1.4 billion people. The swine flu was an infection that affected the respiratory pathway and its functions. Some of the major symptoms symptoms included a fever, headaches, a dry cough, and a sore throat. In severe cases, those infected could also experience conditions like diarrhea, vomiting, or some neurological problems. Though the number of infected people was high, this pandemic did not have a high death toll. The number of deaths has been estimated to be a little over 280,000 people. The reduced death toll is one of the reasons why this pandemic didn't have all the devastating effects one would imagine of such a far-reaching virus. The population of the entire world was about 6.8 billion at the time, so if you get out a calculator and do some middle school math, you might realize the number of infected people made up about 19 to 21% of the world's total population. The influenza was caused by an H1N1 influenza A virus, a virus that's responsible for some other major pandemics as well. This takes us to number 2 on our list. Number 2, the Spanish flu. This is perhaps the most popular pandemic on our list, and the one that current pandemic is most commonly compared with. The Spanish flu got its name from Spain, not because it originated there, rather Spain was the first place where the virus was discovered. The true origin of the pandemic is unknown. The First World War was just coming to an end, resulting in a lot of people moving due to military orders or displacement. Being near the war zone could possibly explain why the pandemic was first discovered in Spain. The Spanish flu lasted for 15 months, from February 1918 to April 1919. In terms of spread, it remains one of the worst in human history. Most estimates suggest about 500 million individuals were infected. To help put that into perspective, that was about 1/3 of the world's population at that time. This meant that 1 in every 3 people on Earth was infected with this particular flu pandemic. The death toll is also quite high, at about 20 to 50 million people, although some estimations put it between 17 and 100 million deaths. Whatever is the case, the Spanish flu definitely left its mark on history, with thousands upon thousands of mass graves all over the world. Another interesting point about the Spanish flu was that it spread in 2 different waves during those 15 months. The first waves lasted for only about 3 months and the effect was mild. During the early days, the flu spread only to a few cities in the more developed and populated countries of the time. The second wave, however, was far more devastating and lasted for more than a year, spreading to different parts of the world. After a gruesome and bloody war, the world was not exactly prepared to combat a pandemic. The spread of the virus only made the effects from the war more profound and long-lasting. Here's one more quick fact about the Spanish flu. The causative agent for the Spanish flu, an H1N1 influenza A virus, was also responsible for 2 major pandemics in the last century, the 2009 swine flu and the 1977 Russian flu. Number 1, the Black Death. When something's called the Black Death, you don't need to be a genius to understand why it would be in the top of the list of worst pandemics in human history. The Black Death lasted for more than 4 years, between 1347 and 1351, making it the oldest pandemic on our list. The Black Death was a bubonic plague that affected the skin, turning it black. It's by far the most devastating pandemic as far as recorded history is concerned. The name Black Death was not used to describe the pandemic during its heyday. In fact, the term didn't appear until at least the mid-1700s. Before then, the Black Death was called the pestilence, the plague, or the Great Mortality by different people from different regions. The pandemic infected more than 500 million people worldwide. It also had a death toll of 75 to 200 million in the 4 years that it ravaged Europe, Asia, Africa, and the surrounding regions. This high mortality rate made the Black Death the worst pandemic in history by a large margin. No other pandemic has had that number of deaths. The population of Europe as a whole didn't rebound until the 1500s, more than 100 years after the pandemic. So there you have it, the 5 worst pandemics in human history. It's interesting to note that the majority of the devastating pandemics that have affected man occurred in the last 2 centuries alone. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure you click the like button and let us know what you think in the comments below. Till next time, have a good one.